Pauper Players podcast. I'm Freestyle, and thank you so much for joining me. If this is your first time joining me, the philosophy of this podcast is to speak to the players who are shaping the metagame so that their voices can be heard. This week's voice will be joining us from Denmark. H.J. Kaiser had what I believe to be the most interesting list in the top 8 of the challenge last week with blue-black fairies. Afterwards, I'm going to go over my challenge top 8 with Naya Slivers. So please, enjoy a tale of two top 8s. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Before I ask you about your Pauper deck, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Hans Jacob. I'm mostly actually a Legacy player. So I played Legacy for I think 7 or 8 years by now. People may know me from Legacy, at least if they know that format well. I occasionally play when there's GPs or other tournaments. I sort of occasionally play other formats, and I've been getting into Vintage lately.
What got you started playing Magic in the first place?
I was back in university, so it's got to be around, 10 years-ish ago, 12 years ago. I know I originally played Magic as a child, so that's back all the way to 4th edition. But, as so many others do at that age, didn't really understand it and didn't really get into it. And then I just saw a pre-release on. When I was in university, I went, and then things just went from there, I guess.
What got you started playing Pauper?
Yeah, so Pauper is actually, it actually started a little bit back at the time when Deathrite Shaman was completely rampant in Legacy. And I was just getting sort of burned out on playing Deathrite Mirrors. And I looked at this wonderful format where instead of playing Deathrite Mirrors, I could play Blue Delver Mirrors, which is wonderful because I love playing Delver Mirrors from Legacy. And so I started playing Pauper. And then the thing that I really like about Pauper is Pauper has some very, very, they're very interactive games. You never really get blown out in Pauper, almost by nature of the format. And so the games that you get to have in Pauper are very skill testing and interesting. So I've been sort of using the format as a little bit of my, if you will, my getaway format from Legacy at times.
So I think you sort of answered was generally my next question. Is it safe to say that's why you've stayed around with Pauper? That's why you stuck with it?
Yeah, that's probably true. Again, it's not my main format, but it's fun when I play it. I tend to play Blue Delver decks, so that's probably also what you'll see if you look at my history. I don't think I've ever really played anything else in Pauper, really.
I think that's the perfect segue into asking you some questions about the deck that you top 8 at the challenge with. You played Blue-Black Fairies. I don't see any Delver of Secrets, and I'm curious, from a design point, why no Delver of Secrets?
This is actually an interesting question. So again, the people who know me may know that I top 8'd, or I won an Eternal weekend in the US in Legacy at some point. And I did that playing Team America, the Bug Delver deck in Legacy. And people have been harassing me to no end in that deck about how few spells there are to flip Delvers and why I was playing Delvers in the first place. Not knowing the fact that in that deck, I tended to board out Delvers in almost every matchup. Now, I feel like Delver in Pauper is actually sort of similar. So the deck that I started playing in Pauper about a year and a half ago ish was the blue-red Scred Delver deck. And in most matchups, you would be boarding the Delver out because you weren't really, you were sort of a tempo board control deck, but Delver's really just a dumb dude that deals damage, and you are not really super in a hurry to kill people. And I feel like that's sort of similar in this current iteration of Pauper. Maybe with the exception of playing against Tron.
Yeah, I'd imagine his presence is missed most frequently against the Tron players, as you are forced to be the beatdown, whereas it looks like this deck is versatile otherwise, and a lot of times you can take on a more controlling role. So tell me a bit about the matchups with this deck. What do you want to play against, and what don't you want to play against?
Yeah, so I think when playing this deck, I don't know, again, so I've played 2 tournaments in the current iteration of Pauper, so I don't know the matchups that well. But I generally I want to play against other blue decks. Not necessarily because the deck is better positioned to fight other blue decks, but I'm fairly comfortable playing blue mirrors. So I generally always want to play blue mirrors. I feel like I'm fairly well positioned against the various creature decks in the format, Stompy. We can get back to that with the difference between this and the blue-red Delver deck. I mean, something like Stompy or Affinity really gets murdered by Gurmag Angler and Snuff Out, which then lets you play your usual. Yeah. So the deck actually came about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. It was when they, right after the bannings, so there were no lists to look at. I had the time to play a Pauper Challenge, and so I needed a deck to play. And given that I've been playing Delver forever, that was where I started. So I started playing a little bit of a blue-red Delver. Without Delvers, I guess, but still the Delver deck nonetheless. And one of the things that I noticed was I kept getting beaten up by Affinity, and I kept getting beaten up by the green Stompy deck, which was very frustrating. And the reason I lost was I could not deal with the big creatures, and in particular, I could not deal with all the auras and the pump spells and the river boas out of the green deck. And that's where I started looking around and trying to be creative. And I figured out that actually if I played black, then Gurmag Angler blocks pretty much every large fatty in the format. Kind of like, Legacy Tarmogoyf would. And the various black spells deal very, very nicely with all of the creatures and situations that I had difficulty beating with the blue-red deck. So that was sort of the theory of how I went to play the deck just in black. And then from there on, I think really the template was still the blue-red Scred deck. Now just running the black removal and running Gurmag Anglers. The positioning, if you will, then comes off a little bit sort of corollary to how the Scred deck is positioned, which is to say that, you're better positioned against some of the creature decks in the format, but the things that you don't have is you don't have access to Pyroblasts, and you don't have access to Lightning Bolt, which means if you play the matchups where you are not trying to kill creatures and that are not do not want to interact favorably with your Gurmag Anglers, then you start running into problems, which particularly is Tron that I've had some fairly savage beatings from.
Moving forward, is there anything that you would change in this list to help solidify, say, that Tron matchup?
I tried, so this time around I tried running the Spell Bombs to see if I could, try and stop the Graveyard Engine, and I'm not quite sure that was very successful. On the other hand, I think there's probably sort of 2 ways to go about it. One is to try and fix it within the blue-black shell, in which case you probably have to accept that you're playing a fair amount of graveyard removal, and then you probably need more hard counterspells of some sort. I think more fundamentally, I'm guessing that if Tron is the deck to beat, then you probably want to go to just playing blue-red, which then devolves back into a good old boring Scred red shell.
Well, speaking about this deck still, I'm curious about your inclusion of Reign of Revelation over something like Winged Words. Some people like Accumulated Knowledge, and you have what sticks out to me as a 4-drop draw spell in a deck with 18 lands. And so I'm just curious how you came to land on Reign of Revelation in that deck slot, and how it's been performing for you.
So that's a very interesting question. Actually, I thought about all of the above. So it was a deliberate choice. And if we sort of talk through the various, before we start talking through the various options, this really for me is the slot that used to be Gush when I was playing blue-red about a year ago. And so I was trying to look around for what's the Gush replacement, if you will. Now, I tried playing AK, but AK is so inefficient of a card, and I don't want 4 of his slots. It's something that, when the game goes long, I want something I can draw in that gives me a real hardcore draw advantage. And for AK to do that, I really need to cast the 3rd AK, which is quite a bit of conditionality and takes quite a while to go there, whereas this one will get me there with just 1 card. By the way, by the time I can cast my 3rd AK, I should have 4 lands anyways. The other alternative would be to just run more Ponders, and just sort of, if you will. But I think I'm already on 4 Ponder, 4 Preordained, so that's not really an option. You mentioned Wings. The problem with Wings is its sorcery speed. I really don't want to tap 2 mana in my own main phase, if I can avoid it.
Okay. You could play Brainstorm, for example. Was that considered at all? I'm just a fan of Brainstorm, so I was curious if you ever considered that.
I did. But again, the thing is, Brainstorm doesn't get you up on cards, and it's fairly conditional. I mean, you need to have your fetch lands in play. I think it's perfectly reasonable to play Brainstorm. I don't think it's unreasonable, but again, from a perspective of me wanting a spell that really puts me out ahead, I don't think Brainstorm has the oomph that I wanted to in this particular slot. Maybe another corollary to what this would be is say when I play Jace the Mind Sculptor in my Legacy Delver deck or something similar. It's the top end of the curve. I don't want a lot of them. Two of them is probably exactly the amount that I want. And for that, Reign of Revelation was just the best thing I could find.
Well, the list does look really clean to me. There's a lot of concise numbers that you seem to have settled on. And, it looks pretty well tuned. Looking at your sideboard, there's some obvious inclusions, right? 3 Hydroblast. Looks like a clean swap for the 3 Snuff Out against Burn. I'm sure you bring in the Dispels as well. Presumably over a Disfigure or 2 would be my guess. But one of the things that sticks out to me in the sideboard is the 2 Cursa Chains. Now, I run 2 Cursa Chains in my blue-red Delver list that, I was fortunate enough to go 1-3 with in the challenge 2 weeks ago, but just earlier that morning went 5-0 in a league and had that list published. I know why I play Cursa Chains, but I'm curious to hear why you play Cursa Chains.
Well, I mean, it's just sort of the additional removal spells for big creatures, whether they be auraed up or otherwise. To be honest, looking back at the different things that I've played against, I'm not sure that I would include them. They do also happen to handle Gurmag Angler, which is kind of a difficult critter to kill otherwise. But I'm sure you can get around that by just having your own Gurmag Anglers. I mean, you just have to trade. It's definitely the least performing card in that sideboard.
When you have Agni Warp, you don't necessarily have to trade Gurmag Anglers. It looks like you can engineer certain situations to trade an Agni Warp for an Angler on the other side of the board.
I mean, that can happen, but it's you're setting yourself up to lose the fight, if you will, because the way Pauper works is people play a lot of counters, and so I prefer to not have to set up something in the combat step in blue mirrors. I mean, I'd like to, and I do it occasionally, but I don't want that to be a necessity in my spells.
I personally have been a big fan of Curse and Chains myself, particularly against Stompy, because it answers Riverboa, and this is more of an issue when red is your secondary color than it is when black is your secondary color. You can just disfigure that thing, but I found that it also is quite nice versus creatures that have Elephant Guide on them, creatures that have Rancor on them, and the entire mono-white heroic deck, Guardian of the Guild Pack. It'll do in a pinch against an Atog. It's been quite versatile, and I've really enjoyed having 2 Cursa Chains in my sideboard for that. So, moving forward, you said you weren't sure about those, and you maybe not sure about the spell bombs. Is there anything that you're looking to try in the sideboard moving forward?
Not as such. I mean, the card I really want in this deck is Pyroblast, which again is sort of feeds back to maybe the solution, and you're kind of feeding on it here because you're saying you need Curse of Chains in the red deck, right? Maybe the solution is to play the red deck but then overload on Curse of Chains, which solves all the problems in the red deck. The other alternative is you need to find some cards that actually help you get ahead against the Tron deck. I looked at potentially playing, like, there's I believe it's called Rancid Earth. There is some sort of land destruction in the format, but so I would probably want to try that out, but I'm a little bit concerned that it probably A, is very difficult to cast, and B, even if you do succeed in casting it, it's probably still conditional enough that, occasionally they'll just get the other Tron land and wreck you anyways, and you've tapped 3 mana in your own main phase.
Yeah, land destruction against Tron is tricky at best because it's a guessing game on your side of the field, exasperated by their inclusion of signets, as well as their ability to just ghostly fligger your targets. So I would myself not be looking to play land destruction in my sideboard for the Tron matchup. Seems good against people that have bounce lands, such as Boros Monarch or Black-White Pestilence. That I can see an argument for with having land destruction in the sideboard. But against Tron, I feel like it's going to be tricky at best. It's going to be a lot more misses than it's going to be hits, because as I observed immediately that it's a bit of a guessing game. You don't know which one they have another copy of in their hand, especially now that you don't have Gitaxian Probe. So I'm not sure if that's necessarily the solution, but I am curious what you played against in the challenge en route to your top 8.
So I had my first round against Tron, which I beat 2-1. Again, it's possible if you have aggressive starts, particularly the fairy into ninja, into Gurmag Angler. The ninjas and the Gurmag Anglers, getting those out early are kind of the key to beating Tron. Then I beat sort of, I believe it was Mono Blue. I tried to look back at the recording, but sort of a mirror-ish thing. They were running Sanctum. I lost to a blue-red control deck, which was playing Scratch, but then also was playing Archaeomancers and running Muldrifters. So he was just, it felt like a mirror, but he had way more card advantage than I did. And I had a very hard time sticking a ninja on him. Then I beat blue-black control, I beat Burn, and I beat the mono-blue Delver player. And that was sort of my route onto the...
Oh, Mezzle.
Yeah, that was Mezzle.
The last of the mono-blue Delver players.
Felt like a very good matchup.
Yeah, I'd imagine that's an incredibly lopsided matchup in your favor. You have all the strengths of his deck with none of the weaknesses. You don't have to run Force Spike. You don't have to run mutagenic growths. You have snuff outs. So that plus just the ability to engineer an Agony Warp seems pretty favorable.
It felt like an exceptionally good matchup. I mean, his deck, as long as I just kill off his ninjas, then like we're playing a mirror where I can kill his creatures and he can't kill my creatures, and he's playing sort of awkward spells like Snap, which are very good if they resolve, but are also sort of heavy and cumbersome and don't give him any card advantage in the long game. Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those, like Snuff Out has really, as a magic card, just been impressing me. It does so many crazy things. And that is one of the matchups, right? I mean, they pump that dude and you snuff out it. And who's ahead of that exchange? It's kind of like, it's like his blue deck sets himself up to have that happen, just like the Stompy deck does when they try and Elephant Guide something and you snuff out it, which is also so often a fairly big blowout. I think there's lots of interesting discussions around how you build that fairy Delver deck. I keep calling it a Delver deck because I'm so used to that sort of nomenclature, but really I should probably call it a Spellstarter Sprite deck rather than a Delver deck. But it's a little hard for me to figure out, given the meta, what you should be doing here. I'm guessing the solution probably is better to play the blue-red deck, but then you want to really figure out how you solve some of the creature matchups with that deck, which maybe is just to accept that you're boarding in a playset of Curse of Chains on a regular basis.
Yeah, certainly Curse of Chains is going to help alleviate some of blue-red phase weaknesses, or blue-red Delver, depending on how you choose to build the deck. One of the small issues with over-relying on Curse of Chains is that Quirion Ranger can trump it, particularly in the Stompy matchup, but that's sort of its biggest flaw. Doesn't seem to me that players are going to be boarding in enchantment removal against either blue-red Fae, blue-black Fae, blue-red Delver, or blue-black Delver. So, seems like a good solution, at least in the short term.
No, I think that's probably... I mean, Quirion Ranger you can always just kill. That should be possible to get around. And the problem is not that you don't have enough removal, it's that they set up these scenarios where they pressure you so much you have to tap out. And then you get punished with either Elephant Guide or the pump spell that puts +1/+1 counters on, or River Boa. And those are just very difficult to deal with either of those three situations out of a blue-red deck.
So these event card justices in your sideboard, I'm guessing that's for Boros Bully?
Well, I mean, anything that plays creatures. Like, I would board them in against the green deck. I would board them in against elves. I mean, if they're kind of I used to play Electrickery and Swirling Sandstorm out of a blue-red deck, so is what I was trying to get out of alternative to those. We're a little bit heavy on the mana bill.
Yeah, I'm sure the double swamp factor isn't always the easiest to set up when you've run 2 swamps in your deck.
Well, I mean, there's lots of fetch lands, so it's not that unreasonable to get it. But yeah, I think the big issue is I just don't, honestly at some level, and I guess this is also where Pauper, because so many of the cards are sort of one-for-ones, is it's just kind of difficult to figure out, like, what else should you run in what should you be making room for in the sideboard? I mean, one option, we're talking about Tron, how to beat Tron. One option is to just go up on, say, soul manipulations or other things that can interact with the creatures in a much bigger way, try and give you a little bit of advantage at the same time. But I'm still not quite sure that that's going to solve it for us.
Okay, well, let's move on into the weekly segments. In your challenge run, what play stood out to you? What was your play of the day?
It's a little hard to remember the exact plays, but I think we talked about it before, but I've had a lot of fun with Snuff Outing. So I'm fairly certain that I did, against Mezzle is probably a good example. I both snuff outed dudes that were getting, the green freak pump spell on. I also happened.
Yeah, mutagenic growth.
Yeah. I also dispelled snaps on my Germaganglers more than once, which was felt like a pretty good exchange.
So in my challenge run, I had to play the Slivers mirror match twice, which was silly. It's people complain about burn mirrors, people complain about Tron mirrors. They are not nearly as ridiculous as Sliver mirrors, where all your dudes pump all their dudes. Everything stacks up except for Predatory Sliver. So whomever draws Predatory Sliver essentially wins. Now, I played against it twice, and I have a misplay of the day where I did something so egregious it's worth sharing because it's hilarious, where my opponent played a Gemhide Sliver, and I was busy having a conversation in real life, as well as having something to eat, as well as I had had a few beers because it's my day off, and it just doesn't register to me that it's a Gemhide Sliver. I straight up thought it was a Predatory Sliver because I just see a green sliver with the new art, and I'm like, oh, he's got Predatory. And I only have these 2 lands, so I cast Winding Wave for lands because I think I need to make land drops to play out my spells when he gave all my Slivers the ability to tap for mana. He opened up chat to ask if that was a misclick, and I was like, no, it's not a misclick. And then when I went back and I actually, it didn't dawn on me till literally like 10 minutes after the match that was a Gemhide Sliver. And I went back in the replays, I'm like, oh god, that was a Gemhide Sliver. Could have cast Winding Wave for creatures, would have hit a Predatory Sliver in that Winding Way, would have hit 4 Slivers with that Winding Way. So obviously I shame conceded. 1, because I didn't realize that my Slivers tap for mana, and 2, just like I missed on Winding Way, and I wasted my entire turn in, an aggro mirror match or mid-range mirror match, however you classify the deck. So that's just so embarrassingly bad, I would love to share it. But on the other side of the coin, the next time that I played the Slivers mirror match, we got into a gigantic board stall where neither one of us had Predatory Sliver, even though we had both resolved Lead the Stampede. We had both resolved Winding Way at least once. And so we have this giant board state where we have all these Slivers just staring each other down. And my hand is 2 copies of Prismatic Strands. So I set it up in a way to where he has more Slivers than I do. And he can swing in with the team, and if he had found another copy of Virulent Sliver, then all Slivers would have Poisonous 5. Right now they only have Poisonous 4. So connecting with 2 dudes won't kill me, but if he finds another copy of Virulent Sliver, he will kill me. And he's also played out a Blade Black Sliver, so he can dump his hand and, start pinging me that way as well. So I just engineered it in a way that if he were to draw the Virulent and send, I could protect myself with Prismatic Strands and then swing back for lethal. And if he were to try to go Hellbent, I could cast out my Prismatic Strands preemptively with the last Sliver on the stack to protect myself from, worrying about being pinged out. And what I wind up doing is he decides ultimately not to send his team. In his end step, I go ahead and just cast my Prismatic Strands using, my Slivers as Birds of Paradises, as I've correctly identified what a Gemhide Sliver looks like. And I just, name black or whatever and just get them in my graveyard. That way I can use Blade Black to turn all them sideways, deal 9 or 10 to him, and then get him, at the start of my next turn. So that sort of was my play of the day, simply because you don't really have too many interactive sweet plays with Slivers. Alternatively, against my Boros Blue opponent, I was able to use Prismatic Strands to stop his Rally the Peasants, which would have allowed him to, double block a lot of different things, then pump them, the Seekers get bigger, and he would have had this nice situation occur. So really just using Prismatic Strands effectively, probably arguably the best inclusion in the Naya Slivers deck from previous versions of Slivers. So those are sort of my play of the days. Not so much the not knowing what Gemhide Sliver does and then trying to Winding Way for lands. That one's it's just too bad not to share. Like I have the ability to laugh at myself. I think it's hilarious in retrospect.
It's interesting because it's the kind of mistake I might make in real life, but in Moto you actually, because you see all the power toughnesses and you see all the text written on the cards, it gets a little even more silly.
Yeah, it was not my finest moment, but that was my loss on the day. It was really to myself. But it's the Slivers mirror. Anything can happen. It's just nonsense. So I wasn't too concerned with losing that one either way, even if it was to an egregious error on my part, which you're right, it's tougher to do online, but somehow yet I managed to do it.
It's an achievement.
Yeah, it's an achievement unlocked, a shameful achievement unlocked for sure. So do you have a silly Slivers ability to share?
So I would like all these Slivers to be fearful of me. That would be nice. So just have them not attack. Just stay back. That's how I like slivers to be.
You prefer the docile slivers?
Yes, very docile slivers. I like to sit and do nothing. That's what I prefer to do in Magic. And slivers sort of counteract the whole doing nothing part that I love so much.
All slivers have found a way to dirtle?
That would be very beautiful. I might play slivers if slivers could dirtle.
Yeah, they're a bit impatient. They're not the most dirtily of the tribes.
Yeah. Maybe an ability that just makes all slivers into O1s. I might play a sliver that makes all slivers into O1s.
Well, in terms of actual Magic cards, there is Dormant Sliver. Are you familiar with that one?
Dormant Sliver?
That's a very dirtily sliver. Not Pauper legal.
I feel like that looks like something you should be able to do some fairly disgusting plays with. There must be a food chain combo deck with that sliver.
Spoken like a true Legacy player.
I don't know what the disgusting deck looks like, but I'm sure there is one, just looking at this text.
All slivers have been watching the impeachment proceedings with an open mind.
That sounds like a fairly good one. Can we make all slivers into well-informed citizens? Then we can have all of them discuss civil politics instead of trying to murder me. I think that would be quite nice.
That would be lovely, wouldn't it? It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast this week, and I wish you the best in all the other formats that you grind, and I hope to see you in the winter spotlight again in Pauper.
Thank you very much. It's been a good, enjoyable conversation. Again, always happy to, if you will, adventure into the Pauper format. I always end up having fun when I do.
En route to my top 8 in the challenge with Naya Slivers, I played against Adepto Terra, previous guest on the podcast, and the eventual winner of this tournament, albeit with a split with his Italian friend Modern Monkey. Played him round 1. He was on Tron, eked out that match in 3 games, discovered right then and there that I was woefully ill-prepared for playing against Tron. I believe that Blade Black Sliver was just going to carry me over the finish line. And he mystical teachings for Blue Elemental Blast, which is a real problem because the closest thing I had in my 75 to answer that was a Standard Bearer, which does absolutely nothing. So, eked that one out. Had a lot to do with him stumbling on colors. He was limited to just one color source in the first game, which allowed me to take the win, and then had an aggressive enough start in the third game to take it down. Round 2, I played against Red Deck Wins. It's a very good matchup for slivers. Did go to 3 games for that one still, but generally they just summon a bunch of 2/2 creatures. Usually they have 1 or 2 removal spells, and you can just sort of endure past those first few removal spells, eventually land a lord. All of a sudden you're going to have an army of 3 creatures before too long, or even 2-3 creatures. Even if you just get 2 plated slivers going and have an army of 1-3 creatures, you can, hold them off quite effectively. Definitely a good matchup for slivers. Round 3, I played the mirror match where I took a loss to my own incompetence, but it's really not even Magic when you play the slivers mirror match. It's a game called Do You Have It or Do I Have It? And he had it. I did not. Round 4, I played against Boros Bully. Some very entertaining games. Also went to 3. A lot of prismatic strands were cast by both my opponent and myself in these games. It was very, very enjoyable Magic, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope my opponent felt the same way. Round 5, I got the Slivers mirror match again. In this one, I won 2-0. In round 6, I played against Blue-Black Land Destruction. At one point, Fade Away was cast against me, and I gave up on having lands to choose to have slivers instead. Obviously, could not keep all of my slivers, so I kept my Virulence, which allowed me to attack for lethal using poison past a Gurmag Angler. So that match also went best of 3, as his start game 2 was just too strong. He had a lot of land destruction and didn't land a Gemhide, couldn't really get anything going. Had an aggressive start in game 3 and was able to take him out with, again, Virulent Slivers, poison, getting through Gurmag Angler. In round 7, I was pared down. My opponent and I agreed to a prize split, simply because I was X1 and he was X2. If he beats me, we both top 16, but if I beat him, I top 8. We both agreed on this observation, agreed to a prize split. We did it as you are able to. We did it in the most legal and ethical manner that you can agree to do a prize split by just observing the situation and coming to an agreement without any promises being made at that time. Any sort of promises or considerations need to be handled after the tournament, as was done. In round 8, which is the top 8, I played against Adepto Terra again, and this time I lost in 3 games to the Tron Menace. Blue Elemental Blast did me in this time. Really interesting situation there, where Blade Back is supposed to be the game ender versus Tron, and all of a sudden it's not reliable anymore to do that. It makes me question if I'm going to stay on Naya moving forward, because I'm going out of my way to splash red here. Mulligan all the time with this deck because of that third color, and if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, then why would I keep doing it? So I'm not necessarily sold on the future of Naya Slivers. Now, I did take the opportunity to reach out to Green Prinny, who finished in the top 16 with Naya Slivers, because his list was notably different. Of all these Slivers lists that were published, they are all building off of, first and foremost, the original 5.0 list that got published by Swift Warkite, and then, bouncing off of a list that I put out that, hey, I got a 5.0 with this, wasn't published this last Wednesday. Someone else as well got another 5.0, so that is at least 3 5.0s that I counted that I knew about with Naya Slivers, so the deck's certainly strong enough to take into a league at this time. But because Green Prinny's deck was so notably different, I decided to reach out and have a conversation with him about some of the choices that he made. Now, one of the more interesting observations I've had since then playing his list is his use of Benevolent Bodyguard over Virulent Sliver. It's hit and miss so far for me. It's quite good at protecting lords, but there are some drawbacks. If you play with Benevolent Bodyguard instead of Virulent Sliver, you give up a lot of equity should you have to endure the silliness of the Slivers mirror match, because you have less Slivers. You're actually playing 1/1s when you draw Benevolent Bodyguard, as opposed to a Virulent Sliver off the top, which can be a 5/5 or a 6/6, and keep pace and make trades. Interestingly enough, Benevolent Bodyguard has cost me a game against Stompy so far, and you would think that Benevolent Bodyguard is pretty good against a mono green deck, ignoring the Vault Scourges, but because it sacrifices for the ability, it can make Hunger the Halpack quite a problem. So it's an interesting inclusion, and it's one of the things that I reached out to him about. So I asked him if there's anything that he would change in his list. Green Prinny said, I wasn't a fan of Standard Bearer in the sideboard. However, something to combat Bogles should be included. In the main, I'm skeptical about the bounce land since it can shut off Hellbent. Sentinel Sliver might be a consideration since it has synergy with Gemhide and Bladeback. I agreed. I said that I was going down to 2 Standard Bearer myself, seemed like a necessary evil, and that I'd always advocated for Standard Bearers over Benevolent Bodyguard until realizing that Benevolent Bodyguard can protect Bladeback Sliver from a Blue Elemental Blast, where a Standard Bearer can't. So that's an interesting observation as well for these two lists, something to keep in mind, that Benevolent Bodyguard is arguably better against Tron, although turn 1 Virulent is a pretty good start against Tron. Really it is. So I asked him a little bit more about it, and I observed that with Tribe, Bogles, Blitz, and Mono White Heroic being non-existent, and with Elves in decline, I guess nearly every reason to be on Standard Bearer over Benevolent Bodyguard is gone. Green Prinny said, I agree. Bearer is effective hate against those decks. Bodyguard is a bit better as a protection card. The mana can be awkward, since we always want turn 1 planes and turn 2 forest, and I said, well, you do. I'm still on Virulent Sliver, which I'm happy to hear why that got the cut. He says, the Lords are the main plan, and protecting them has always been better for me than playing on curve. For me, Virulent has been a curve filler with a sometimes relevant ability. So these are some things to keep in mind moving forward. Should you be looking to play the Slivers deck, are you going to play Benevolent Bodyguard in your main deck or not? It's a relevant consideration. I'm not sure which is correct at this time. There's arguments to be doing it. There's arguments not to be doing it. The arguments for at this time seem to outweigh the arguments against. It's probably a net positive inclusion. Before I let him go, I just checked in with him and asked him what he lost to en route to that 15th place finish at XN2. He said he lost to the Sliver mirror match as well as Tron. My exact 2 losses on the day as well. So very interesting. Very similar finishes, similar enough decks, something that I was happy to open a dialogue with another talented Pauper player and pick their brain a little bit about the same archetype. If you're going to choose to pick up Slivers, I would say try both lists. There's things about his list, about his sideboard that I really like. My own list, I'm probably going to just remove Gorilla Shamans. I never played against Affinity. Obviously, if you have Affinity players at your local game store, Gorilla Shaman is quite strong. But if it's not going to be present in the online metagame, I'm not going to include it. What seems to be on the rise, however, is these fairy decks, which are historically not a good matchup. And even though that Hollow is present in my sideboard as well as his to protect the team from Swirling Sandstorm, there's still the issue of blue-black fairies. There's still the issue of just them being able to interact effectively against you. Gut shots might just be a good inclusion to stop Spellstarter Sprites. They'd also have some versatility against Stompy, as Vault Scourge is the scariest Stompy card, but more likely, if you're on Naya, Electrickery seems like a safe bet. You could use it against elves as well as the different flavors of Fae. Regardless of whether you choose to play the Green Prinny list, my list, or H.J. Kaiser's Blue-Black Fairies deck, I most sincerely hope that you find something that you enjoy playing as much as I've enjoyed making this podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.